Funniest thing, bro. It's the funniest thing. I love Twitter, but go ahead, Eric, please.
Video games have come a long way since the Atari era and has evolved tremendously from the Nintendo and Sega era to the modern PlayStation/Xbox era of today. Despite being the youngest medium compared to its media contemporaries, there is still so much potential for what gaming can offer from not just an interactive standpoint, but a storytelling one as well. It has gotten so big that despite how expensive gaming has got, seriously $70 now, the worlds and graphics have only gotten more expansive and realistic. But is that a good thing? I mean, as we continue getting bigger games with higher graphical fidelity, game development has been noticeably becoming longer to the point where games which a decade ago would have taken 2 years to develop now take double, hell even triple the amount of time to release. The main reason is because the expectations for graphical fidelity today have never been higher. Like for example, look at this past year with the amount of videos and comparisons about how much graphics feel like they've stalled as opposed to before. I've seen more people complain about small details that honestly don't even matter in the grand scheme of an overall game, but has become a hotly debated topic in social media. Like, it's crazy how much hard work goes into making the world feel more immersive, and I applaud the game developers that go an extra mile, but come on, should I really care about the horseball physics in a game where I play as Arthur in Red Dead 2? Maybe not. The more games I play, the more I notice that the games that stick with me, or to be more specific, the ones that strike me more, aren't the games that strive to look photorealistic. Rather, games like Persona 5, a JRPG that uses its immense style to bolster its substance. Every ounce of that game has personality from the second you start the game to the very end credits. Or a game like Final Fantasy VII Remake, which blends both realism and stylism so well, it almost feels like you're watching a 3D animated movie. Recently, I have stopped caring about how high graphical fidelity can go, as games that strive for that sense of realism just aren't fun gameplay wise. You know the ones I'm talking about. The cinematic third person over the shoulder video game that almost feels like you're watching a movie rather than playing a video game. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for games like that, and I own a lot of them and even platinum some of them. But I've noticed how much they've affected the gaming industry, and today I want to point out some ways in which they did.
Uses a very special technique which is pioneered by, once again, a guy called Paul Debevic, using light stage data, and we can move the light around over the face, and you can see that the shadows are cast realistically, and even the light reflects and transmits through the ears.
For the past generations of consoles, we've seen massive leaps in graphical fidelity. Going from the 6th generation to the 7th generation of consoles was insane, especially for me as a kid. We went from this to this, and it only kept us gamers excited to see where graphics would continue to evolve next, which only fueled our excitement when we went from the 7th generation with games like this to the 8th generation with games like this. And as games continued to become more photorealistic, especially with Sony's first party exclusives, it's safe to say that our expectations for the 9th generations of consoles was sky high. Well, we are now 3 years into the 9th generation, and it doesn't seem like we've gotten such a big leap we've been hoping for. Don't get me wrong, games like Horizon Forbidden West and Ratchet & Clank look great, but we clearly aren't seeing the drastic leaps in fidelity like we have before, and I don't think we ever will. We have hit a point of diminishing returns in gaming. The reason for that can be contributed to the prioritization of 4K and 60 FPS. Gamers today are looking for the best image quality possible, so games with native 4K is near essential for this era of consoles. The problem, however, is when you put all your resources in trying to get the best performances for games, fidelity will take a hit. When we're at a point where we need to go frame by frame and zoom in into textures to see if there's any noticeable difference in graphics from the last generation, yeah, that's a problem.
Gaming.
I mentioned Persona 5 earlier in the video about how stylish that game is, and I feel like Persona will age far better than games like Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and that's because games that strive for photorealism will never be able to compete with games 5 years from now when technology continues to evolve and improve. Wind Waker is an example I've seen many videos used to bolster this argument, but it's for good reason. The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker released in 2003. 2003! And you can still play that game today and it won't look outdated because of its style. Compare that to games like Knights of the Old Republic, and I love that game, but it's nowhere near the level of fidelity games have today. Games that go for the photorealism style will never age long. Eventually, the latest Naughty Dog or Rockstar game will surpass it in fidelity, and soon those games will be surpassed as well. It's for that reason why recently we have been getting more remasters for games that released no more than 5 years into its release date. And with gaming's obsession with looking as real as possible in order to attract those gamers, gameplay feels like it's being sidelined. This mindset is why developers are constantly prioritizing graphics over what really matters in games, you know, the gameplay, which makes games in general seem dull to play or extremely buggy at launch. There's no surprise that games that look stylized play far better than games like this, and I'd argue are more visually striking and far more memorable as well. Let me explain. Look at these two games, both of which at the time of me writing the script haven't really been released yet. One is the new Hellboy, a game that uses its source material as a blueprint for its visuals and is dripping with atmosphere with popping colors and use of shadows, versus Starfield, a game that, while impressive for how expansive it seems to be if we take Todd Howard's word for it, ultimately looks dull and generic, especially compared to something like No Man's Sky, a game that's similar to it but pops way better and is far more visually appealing to the eye. Which one of these two games do you think will age better? Great and creative art direction will always triumph over games that go for that realistic angle, because we as humans will always look for those imperfections no matter how advanced technology has and will become. I'm sure it's no surprise that games have been taking way too long to develop. So long in fact that studios move on to the next generation of consoles after only one game. Hell, some even skip a generation entirely. Compare this to the PS2 era when games took 1 to 2 years to develop and release and still maintain their high quality. A great example of this is the early Resident Evil games versus the later titles in the series like Resident Evil 7 and Evil Village. With more powerful machines and greater graphical capabilities comes an increase in resources needed for development. These are steadily getting more and more work each year as games are becoming more expansive and higher in fidelity. Resolutions get higher, requiring higher quality textures, and models require more polygons to achieve the standard of people's expectations. I know there's a lot more to this than just graphics, and hopefully I get the chance to discuss why game development in general is taking longer now than any other time in history, but fidelity is a major factor in this, especially with how much bugs they need to sort out before release. We as gamers are always looking for the best production values, especially when it comes to these massive AAA games, but with that comes big setbacks like long development cycles, crunch, and a focus on presentation rather than innovation. Developers are putting a massive amount of resources into graphics that it leaves barely any room for the ideas in game design or story in order to make the games more realistic. Games that offer a more stylized approach to the visuals without focusing on things that don't matter, like how interactive a random tree branch is in the background, always end up costing less, don't produce as much crunch, and can even help shorten development cycles between game releases. I am not saying that games with an immense amount of detail, like a Naughty Dog or Rockstar game, shouldn't be celebrated or pursued amongst other developers, because those two especially make hit after hit. They're the most celebrated game development studios in history. But what I am saying is that more big budget AAA developers should branch out into other styles that can help minimize the plague of crunch and long development time. Games like Persona and Breath of the Wild never needed to look realistic to gain massive support and love from fans. They were just incredible games that used its immense style to its advantage and will age like fine wine in the future. We need more games like that, and I can't wait to see where gaming will go in the future. Alright, so let me know what you guys think. This is something that I've kind of been thinking about for a while. Let's have a discussion in the comments, and I'll keep you guys posted when I make the next video. I thank you guys so much for watching.